going to send to the E location. The block in the E location, you're going to send to the C location. But since this is only a 3 cycle, the C location wraps back around to A. That's the actual maneuver you do in picking the blocks up. And I've highlighted that with a 1 to show that that's step number 1. What that does is it solves the 2 colored pieces here. So this is the original scramble. The blocks are rearranged. I'm going to do A, send it to E, send it to C. So the A location, A, B, C, D, E, I'm going to send that here. That block that's here, I'm going to send it to the C location, A, B, C. The block that's here, I'm going to send back to A. And this is what it looks like afterwards. So notice in green, A, B, C, D, E, and then the rest are still scrambled. So I fixed those 2 blocks. I already know that these 2 blocks are put in the correct spots. So the operation is just go by your list of directions, and once you do the first 3 cycle, it's always the first block. You always start there, send it to the next 2. That actually solves those 2. Okay, the next step, and I know I'm going through this kind of quickly. You don't have to know the sequences of turns I'm doing. I just want you to get the basic idea of how this works. You always, for each 3 cycles, start at the A. So after doing A goes to E goes to C, that's step 1. I again start at A, but this time I do A goes to H goes to F. I continue along my list of directions. And I've highlighted that in blue, showing that that's step number 2. That will actually solve these 2 pieces. The H and the F blocks will end up being in the correct location. So F is in A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. So I know the F and the H are now in the correct spots. Now, I'm not keeping this in mind. I'm not at any point during the blind solve saying, okay, well, I know these blocks are in the correct location. I'm only thinking of what's the next direction. I've already done these directions, so I don't care about them anymore. I've already finished them. So in a blind solve, once you do a direction, you forget about it. You don't have to remember it anymore. That's already done. I've already passed that. I'm going to move on. Now, the next one is a bit tough. After doing step 2, I have to send A to D. But there's no third piece in that cycle. We're not really allowed to do what's called a swap. A Rubik's Cube does not allow it. Remember, earlier I mentioned not all positions on the cube are solvable. A swap is impossible. You can't just swap 2 corners, or you can't swap 2 edges. That's one of those unsolvable scrambles. You can, however, do what's called a double swap. So A goes to D, D goes to A. That's my swap, 2 pieces switch. But I have another one. B goes to G, G goes to B. You are allowed to do double swaps. So notice this is all step 3. I'm going to switch A and D, and at the very same time, I'm also going to switch B and G. Now down here, notice at the very end, we had the B and the G. Remember, the B location and the G location are 2 pieces that you just need to pick up and move and just switch them. We've done that, but we've also swapped the last A and D. So A and D are now solved as well. Those are the only 2 tools you use, really. There are a couple of others you might need from time to time, but in a blind solve, you pretty much just use the 3 cycle. That's the green and the blue steps. Or you use the double swap, which is, the yellow and the orange. That's pretty much it. Occasionally you'll have a piece that's in the right place but twisted. So that's something you'll just learn a pattern that will fix that. But 95%, maybe not quite that much, like 90, something like that, % of what you do are just those 2 tools, a 3 cycle or a double swap. So now on to the memory. Yes, go ahead.
Do you have to do that for each side or for 5 sides?
Yes, because what I'm doing is when I'm originally studying it, and that's what this is going to go over, I'm not really remembering the colors. I don't actually know what the cube looks like. I'm remembering a set of instructions. And then the instructions are those cycles. So I've got in my mind cycles that are telling me send the A block to the G block to the B block, stuff like that. And then as I do each instruction, I then forget what I've done, because I'm moving on always to the next one. I don't have to hold on to what I did before.
So you're remembering all 5 of those to do one that size?
Mm-hmm. And I'm breaking it up into the corners and the edges. So you can think of it, rather than thinking of, like, is the green side done? I'm thinking of it as the 8 corners, or I'm thinking of it as the 12 edges. So the idea is we're actually reframing the cube as a puzzle made out of 20 pieces, 8 corners and 12 edges, versus the colors. I don't really pay attention to the colors. It's just, is this piece in the right location? Is the B block in the B location? As to the memory aspect of it, you can imagine that you're basically remembering a list of directions that you have to follow through, which there are a lot of pieces on the cube. There are 20 pieces. On a 5x5, there are much more. I believe it's 92 pieces on a 5x5. So we run into, how are you going to remember a set of directions that's 92 things in length? That's kind of an issue, actually. Yes. Uh-huh.
When you're telling blindfolded, how do you keep track of which side you're on?
I have to very carefully hold it
Okay.
in the orientation I started with. And if I spin it, I have to remember what that spin direction was.
Okay.
And I have to undo that correctly. And that's actually a mistake a lot of us blind solvers make sometimes, is we'll spin it, we'll do the sequence we're supposed to, but we'll forget to spin it back, or we'll spin it back the wrong way. And then when you open your eyes, the cube is completely scrambled. So that happens in a competition too. A blind solver will solve, say I'm done, and the cube looks no more put together than when they started. So that unfortunately is a side aspect of it. So, okay, memorization is really interesting stuff. And this is kind of the takeaway message for this talk today. Memorization, you can train your memory. Memory can be improved, and it can be improved drastically from what you might expect. Modern memorization techniques, for the most part, trace back to Simonides, and I might be mispronouncing that, I apologize if so, but Simonides of Chios was a Greek lyric poet, and he had a very tragic incident happen in his life that was the impetus for him creating this method. Simonides was in a banquet hall with a bunch of nobles, and they were actually celebrating one of the lyric poems that he had just written for a nobleman. When he was called outside, so two people showed up saying, "We need to speak with you. We have an important message for you." So he leaves the banquet hall. At the time he does so, the roof of the banquet hall collapses and kills everybody inside. And it was a horrific disaster for the time. The banquet hall collapsed. It was so bad they actually couldn't identify the bodies. They couldn't recognize who was who. And the family members came. It was the whole town came, and the family members wanted to be able to bury their loved ones, but they didn't know who their loved ones were. And it's a really horrific scene, but they couldn't identify who was who because the rubble was so bad. So they asked Simonides, "Who was sitting where? You were at this banquet hall. Who was sitting where?" And he said, "I have no idea. There were so many people there." But then he said, "Okay, well, hold on. Let me picture this." So he closed his eyes, and he imagined the banquet hall table where he was sitting. And he went chair by chair all the way around the table and correctly was able to remember everybody. He could remember in his mind's eye who he spoke to on his left, who was two seats down, who was across this way, who was in front of him on the right. And that led to him essentially coming up with this method called the method of loci. Or like the idea being that you can remember things spatially much better than you can just use your rote memory. So like if you've ever memorized a poem or a phone number, you're using what's called your auditory loop, so to speak. You're just kind of saying the numbers over and over in your head. But you actually want to remember the numbers as if you were sitting at a table. So you would imagine a table. There's a 7 sitting next to me. There's a 6 nearby, stuff like that. That's more the idea of how memory works. Now, okay, so what I'm going to start with, and this is actually leading into the next part, we're going to create what's called a memory palace. Now, Simonides' memory palace was the banquet hall table. Our memory palace today, and I want everybody to do this, is going to be your house. It's a house that you were very comfortable in. This could be your childhood home. This could be the house that you've lived in now. But make sure it's a house you were very comfortable in, that you've lived in, you're comfortable to come home there. You have a lot of fond memories in this house. That's what I want you to picture. But I want you to picture 4 specific locations in the house. And I want everybody to walk through with me at the same time. First, picture the front door. You are outside the house, and you're looking at the front door. However, you're not right next to the door. You're about 10 feet back, and you're viewing the front of your house. Now, I want you to picture, is there a porch?